Hi guys, welcome to this video and welcome to my channel. My name is Laura from Pleiadian Healer at pleiadianhealer.com. And today I want to share some insight on the Ankh, fake Egypt, possibly saints, and the lost sun, and a few more. So I'm going to share a few images. While I do so, I also have my own Ankh right here. I know the light's a bit over flashing everything right now, but it is what it is. Also, of course, right before recording this video, what happens? There's like super duper commotion in the hallway of my building, meaning screaming kids. So I hope they stay away for this video. And then also my neighbor kind of popped on his TV or whatever on extra super duper loud. So I can actually hear the background music quite fine. I hope the microphone doesn't pick up on it though. And this is crazy. It's legit crazy because usually I record at night because of those type of distractions, but you want to record for the first time ever during a normal hour in the longest time. And then all of that happens. And like when I was setting up, none of that happened. So just to give you an idea how life works when they're really trying to get to your message and trying to get to you overall. And I've never been able to hear that TV. I know they have a TV, obviously, but I've never been able to hear it up until today. So today is a special day. And yeah, and of course, I hope you guys are having a wonderful time, whatever you're doing right now as well. So we're going to talk about the Ankh. I have not just one, but two Ankhs. So I brought them with me from Luxor. These are just like the wooden versions that I could fit in my carry-on bag. But yeah, just like cheaply made wooden Ankhs that you can buy at some of the souvenir stores where you're like really harassed whenever you want to go to the Valley of Kings or Valley of Queens. And what is the Ankh? So the Ankh, every tour guide out there, you can actually see through the Ankh, right? You actually, an eye fits through it. Kind of reminds you of the Eye of Ra, doesn't it? Like a little bit at least. So I'm gonna do this on because I like the darker color more. Okay, so every tour guide out there in Egypt is gonna tell you the Ankh means the key of life. And you can see the Ankh everywhere, by the way. So when you go to all of these hieroglyphs and sacred sites or whatever they consider sacred sites, you're going to have an Ankh at every single corner that you turn. This would be an example of it. This was at Hatshepsut. I think that's how you still pronounce it. And so they tell you the Ankh is the key of life, possibly related to the tree of life, all of that, but they're more focusing on like it's an actual like key and everything. And the way it's being held in some of these hieroglyphs, like in this one, you see he's kind of holding it, right? So at first, when you're there and everything, you're really like just taken in by the entire energy of being chased through all these tombs and being chased from one side to another. So you're like, oh gosh, this is so powerful. Yeah, of course it's a key because they're holding it like that. But the more I saw it, the more hieroglyphs I saw it in, the more I was just wondering, I don't think this is the story that really happened. I think this is just a story that they want you to know. And here you see it again too. So this was in the Valley of Queens. All of that is around Luxor, by the way. So if you only go to Cairo, you don't get to see this at all. What you really have to do is you have to actually take a flight to Luxor and kind of go up and down the Nile. So you can do either a Nile cruise or just hire a driver and do it yourself. But basically, this is I believe it was from the Valley of Queens, if I'm not mistaken. I forgot who she was in particular. I'm not sure if she was supposed to symbolize Isis even. She has a scarab up here. So you will see two symbols all over Egypt and all over these sacred sites. You will see the scarab, which is supposed to be good luck and rejuvenation and all of that. And then you will see the Ankh, and all of this is pushed everywhere in every single tourist shop. See, I didn't even really, I didn't pull out the picture where I was in tourist shops and the Ankh was like everywhere. But basically, when I came back home, And I had to work through all these impressions, because when you're on the road for like 2 weeks straight, right, and you're being chased like from one side to another, which it's fun too, you know, it's fun to explore. But I basically did 4 to 5 different countries in that time. And you don't really have time to just settle. It takes a while. You either go there for longer, which some people decide to do, or you just have to come home and settle with the energy. So it took me a while to get used to the energy back here again, by the way. And then once you kind of just settle and you're able to psychically read on all these things, I was like, hold on, this is not the key of life. This is just what they're telling you, but this is an actual portal. And so the Ankh, from what I've gotten at least, so you can actually see through the Ankh, right? The way I'm doing it, kind of like, ooh, okay, it opens up a portal. This is kind of like a device that they used to remote view the underworld, because the underworld is really being pushed in the old Egyptian folklore and belief system that they had. You know, they have all of these treasures that they have in the tombs. That's why the tombs were raided as well, because they had so much gold and jewelry and gemstones and whatnot in there. And so they would just dump all these treasures onto the old pharaohs and everything, for them to cross over to the underworld. So the underworld was one of the most important things, one of the most important belief systems that they held. And maybe we should cover the underworld in a separate video too, because I feel there's more to that entire underworld story as well. So I don't think it's necessarily a form of heaven that people who are Christian nowadays believe, but I think it's more of a doing this journey towards the underworld, towards like another piece of you. And then they already had an understanding. I definitely feel they had an understanding back then that your soul is endless. You just kind of move from this physical body to the next phase. But I'm not sure if they really believed in reincarnation in that sense. So it would be something to look into a bit further, because obviously when you go to other cultures, like in India, for sure, they believe in reincarnation and everything, even though there it's very twisted. They think if you've done something wrong in this lifetime, you're going to be reincarnated as an insect or whatever. That's not how it works. So they already have those in other cultures. I'm not sure about the ancient Egyptian belief system and reincarnation. I wouldn't be surprised if they did have that and it just got forgotten. Yeah, because it's already a bit longer ago than yeah, it's obviously, I think it is a few thousand years ago. I don't think it's as long ago as they want us to believe, but I do think it's a little while ago. So it's just gotten forgotten what they really believed in. The underworld was a huge concept for them, and there must have been something to it. Why would you dump a person? Why would you just dump all those treasures onto them for them to go to this place if the place doesn't hold a huge significance in this person's afterlife, right? So they would use the Ankh as a portal to the underworld. How would they do that? So you can't just look through it. It's a form of remote viewing, for the lack of a better word. So call it astral journeying or traveling or remote viewing. They already had those type of insights on psychic abilities for sure. And they already had other spiritual concepts too. And then it just really got twisted in all these narratives, and all the hieroglyphs that you see nowadays are fake, by the way. So I'll talk about that in a moment. But basically, the Ankh in a form, you can put your eyes through it and you can literally see. Somehow they had the technique where they could remote view it. I think it would be similar to scrying. Scrying is a practice where people look into a crystal ball or look into like a black onyx sphere or whatever, and they can see things. So I think it would be similar to this, or a different technique they used, but it would be a form of remote viewing. And this would be their portal to the underworld, also symbolize the underworld, and or just symbolize the connection to the underworld. So I don't think this is the key of life necessarily that they want you to believe nowadays. Every tour guide out there is going to push that on you, which I found very surprising, that it's always the same story. It's always the same narrative, no matter what tour you take, where you go. But basically just the way it's symbolized in every single hieroglyph out there, it got me questioning too what's really going on. Here's here's Jesus in Jerusalem, which I want to talk about Jerusalem at the end as well. So yeah, so this is the Ankh. And then fake Egypt. So I'm just walking through all these things for a few days, and I'm like, okay. And some of them, you see the color that's kind of coming off already. And I'm like, I don't think these are as old as they want us to believe. I already felt energetically, I don't think these are that old at all. It reminded me more of the medieval ages, like 500 years ago. But I was just like, this is so weird. Like, why would these be 2 or 3,000 years old? And then they all excavated them maybe 100 years ago, maybe less than that, depending on the tomb. Like Tutankhamun was exactly 100 years ago, which is also why they have this huge exhibit in Cairo going on right now. And Tutankhamun was one of the youngest pharaohs, for people who don't know. That's the one where you have the entire mask that's going on. So I did manage to take a blurry picture of the mask, and I also took some pictures of his treasures, but basically you can't take any pictures of him in Cairo, so I had to kind of sneak it in. And then, of course, there was someone right next to me saying, no pictures allowed. But the only reason no pictures are allowed is because at the end of the Cairo Museum, when you go to the gift store, you're supposed to buy these books with professional photographs on the mask and everything. So it's all about, Egypt is all about money making. For people who've never been there, the energy of Egypt is the energy of con men, basically. And Egypt for me, so I haven't talked much about my impressions of the Middle East, at least not publicly. I have mentioned it on my Patreon, and my patrons know where I think it was the most spiritual and where I think I was just fooled around with. So I want to have a separate video on it, because I feel every location deserves its own impression in that sense. Jordan felt the freest out of all the countries visited. So I went to Morocco, Jerusalem, West Bank, which is Palestine, and Egypt. Jordan felt the freest. And that is also not surprising, because Jordan is the third strongest currency in the world. I think Kuwait is the strongest one. I forgot which one was in between. I'm not sure if it was United Emirates or it was another Arabic currency. The strongest currency, meaning it's not impacted by inflation as much as others are. So of course, the US dollar is the strongest right now ever, in the sense of you want to pay with the US dollar anywhere, you can pay in all of these Arabic countries. You can go to Africa, you can go to South America, you can use the US dollar everywhere. And people actually prefer you paying with US dollars in Egypt over Egyptian currency, because the Egyptian currency went completely downhill in December 2022 and on. They had a hyper mega inflation. So I have an Egyptian friend who I stayed with for a few days in Cairo too, and she told me like the inside scoops of what's going on. Basically, they had this hyper mega inflation in December, and everyone's impacted. Like everyone's struggling, everyone's scrambling. It's just a huge disaster over there right now. While I'm recording this, we're in April 2023, in case you're seeing this in replay later on. So yeah, in general, Egypt didn't have the strongest currency to begin with. It was always really under the influence of those factors like inflation, but our entire world right now is going through inflation, right? It's just with Egypt, it's even 10 times as worse, from my understanding. So you would see these tourist books where a price, they would be written like a year or two ago, where a price of a restaurant would be quoted in one, and then you go there a year later and the price has like doubled. That's basically how bad it is in Egypt right now. So Jordan is less impacted by inflation. They have the third strongest currency in the world, in that sense that it just stays consistently, the prices stay consistently, all of that. Of course, you can pay with US dollars there, but they actually, from my understanding, they don't prefer it as much as they do in Egypt and Morocco. So that was interesting for me to see too. In that sense, out of all those countries, Jordan felt really free. Like I felt extremely free. It's just this type of freedom. I can't describe it. I definitely felt freer like in certain parts in the US too. Which I didn't have in all these other countries that I visited. I was like, this is amazing. This feels like pure freedom somehow. And we went to Wadi Rum, the desert, where they filmed all those movies, the Transformer, I think a Mars movie too with Sandra Bullock or whatever. So we went to all those places. We went to Petra as well. my friend asked me, is the energy in Petra super heavy? Because she saw the pictures and she was like, the red rocks and everything. And I'm like, no, actually the energy is very light. Of course, you're going to be screwed over by all the, all the people who want to sell you a donkey ride or sell you souvenirs. Like you have that all over the Middle East. You have that all over South America too. You have that all over Southeast Asia too. So just when you go to third world countries or developing countries, you're going to have that, obviously. But aside from that, actually, no, it was pretty neat. You hear those weird stories of like people being trafficked in the Jordan desert on tour or on tour groups or whatever. At least I heard those afterwards. I'm like, I can't imagine that really, because Jordan felt like a pretty free country, and I would definitely want to return there too. But aside from that, now back to Egypt and everything. So Egypt, the energy in Egypt, the most stressful on this entire trip. My adrenal glands were working overboard, where when I came back for 2 weeks straight, every time I was washing my hair, I lost bushels. I lost bundles of hair, like, complete, like I've never had so much hair loss as after this trip. And the reason for that was because I was just not relaxed, especially in Egypt. I always felt like at every corner I had to pay attention with everything, every step I was making. I was obviously by myself, traveling solo as a woman through these countries is also not for everyone. I do realize that. I've been solo traveling for almost 10 years at this point, like really consciously solo traveling, where I just put myself out there on these trips and everything. South America is also stressful, don't get me wrong, but for some reason, Egypt felt like the most stressful that I've had in a few years. And obviously, we were kind of locked down and everything during 2020 and on. So this was like the first real trip that you could really take. But basically, my adrenal glands were working overtime, overboard, where it just kind of came out in a lot of, just like you could feel your skin being different too because of that. But like the hair loss was intense, like really intense. And it's simply because, especially when you're alone, not necessarily just being a woman, because it also happened to men who were alone. I talked to a lot of different people on this trip. When you're alone and you're a white person, I mean, you're just not from there. You're just being harassed constantly. Like at every corner, it's like, here, buy my tour guide book. Oh, buy this Ankh. Oh, buy this souvenir. Please, I have to feed my family. Oh no, my son has to go to the hospital. Can you please buy this for me? All these stories that you hear where you literally think at first, is this a joke? Just because I'm a tourist and I'm in your country, I have to buy all this crap. Like you're basically just being harassed everywhere. The only place I was not harassed was when I with my friends in her place, and when I was taking an Uber from the pyramids of Giza to other parts of Cairo, basically. But even in like certain taxis in Luxor, like I had to take this one taxi ride from the airport in Luxor to wherever I was staying. The guy would not shut up. He was already making plans on, oh yeah, and then I can just move to the US and marry you, and all that crap that you literally think, okay, I know you're joking, I know you're not serious, but I have to listen to this for an hour straight because I can't just jump out of the car in the middle of this ride. Basically the worst nightmare ever. So being constantly harassed for 1 week straight in Egypt was not great. Would it have been different had you gone with a tour? I don't know. I'm not a person who goes with tours necessarily. I do take certain tours to these places like the Valley of Kings, but I don't take like cruises or whatever. I'm just not that type of person. So I guess if you go with a family to Egypt, you should be okay. You're still going to be harassed though, because that is just the energy of Egypt overall. The energy of Egypt, I'm going to look at my notes while I'm recording this. The energy of Egypt is that of con men, and it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's kind of always been that way. Okay, so the energy, I would say for sure would have been that way 2,000 years ago. Now with fake Egypt though, it really did not feel what I was looking at, all these structures, even the pyramids of Giza, you have all these energetic groups who are doing their energy work trips, and they charge you like 5,000 or above for that. Like you have this Mary Magdalene ISIS group doing sacred activations at the Pyramid of Giza and then moving on to Luxor and everything. By the way, all of those groups are illegal in the Middle East. Okay, so if worse comes to worse, you can actually be arrested for being caught doing that type of energy work in Egypt. It's a very conservative country. I myself have never worn anything, no shorts, no mini skirt, nothing that would not cover my legs fully. Even something like this, like I wouldn't even necessarily wear something that would that would kind of expose my shoulders necessarily. It got pretty hot in Luxor, but I did not feel comfortable. You know, it's not super conservative like other Arabic countries, maybe, but you do have to kind of, it's not like Turkey. Okay, so you do have to kind of pay attention to that. There are people that walk around in shorts and mini skirts and everything. Like I saw this 60-year-old woman doing it, and then I also saw these Egyptian men just kind of staring at her, and I'm like, I don't want to be in that situation when I'm alone and traveling. So for me, as a safety measure, had I been with someone else, maybe I would have walked around like that, but not really. It just makes you feel uncomfortable. You know, it's a different mindset, and it is super conservative. And I know I'm not the only one who's noticed that. You know, I've talked to a lot of people who are kind of also just like traveling through Egypt and everything. I talked to this one British guy who was basically like, he wore shorts on one day and he looked around and he was basically the only one wearing shorts in entire Luxor. And he's like, okay, the next day I definitely wore long pants again because it just felt really uncomfortable even for him. So it's just what it is, right? Like I wore like long skirts and long dresses, but yeah, it's just a different mindset, let's put it that way. Like you can't really show your midriff or, you know, I wouldn't even show your cleavage or anything because you're just kind of putting yourself in situations you don't want to be in, especially when you're solo as a woman, let's put it that way. Okay, not that so it's not that you're going to be sexually assaulted or attacked. I didn't get that either from Egypt, but you could, you know, like everywhere you go, and that's just how it is, you know, like 75% of this world are developing or third world countries. There are only 55 first world countries for people who didn't know this. So basically the strong majority of this world is developing, and developing in third world also means unsafe. People can argue with me all day long. They think the US is unsafe. They think Sweden's unsafe. They think Germany's unsafe. You have no idea what unsafe means until you go to a country where you're being confronted with having to be indoors by 7 p.m. because otherwise you might put yourself in an attack and all of that. And Mexico is the same way. Okay, Mexico for a single woman is not necessarily the safest place to be in certain areas after 7 p.m. So it's the same, you know, I'm going to have a different video on the passport when people want to give up their American citizenship, whatever. You've never seen people trying to enter a border from one African country to another the way I have in Morocco. There were Africans lined up to go from a southern part in Africa through Morocco to Spain or whatever. They were at the border for weeks. You could smell it. They didn't take a shower in days or weeks. They had one suitcase with them. Some even had animals with them, like cats and pets. They were not let through because what I found out later is Morocco is like one of the stricter countries to leave you through. But yeah, they were not let through because they didn't have the right passport. Your passport, your Western passport, it doesn't matter if you're Asian, white, African American, or whatever. Your Western passport opens up doors, and that's a privilege that you have. And if you don't see it that way, be my guest, go to those third world countries and come back and tell me again that you want to give up your citizenship. It's completely ridiculous. You will never do that once you've seen that. So just like a few rants that I have, because I really don't think people appreciate what they have. And that's also why I like to go to those countries, because it really makes you appreciate more what you have and the safety you have here. And despite the news trying to push, oh, the US is so unsafe, oh, New York City is so unsafe, it is not unsafe compared to those countries. Okay, I do not feel the same way here that I felt in Egypt, for example. So anyhow, and Middle East is safe, don't get me wrong, at least the majority of it seems safe. It's just different cultures, different mentalities, the Arabic culture, the Muslim mentality that you're dealing with, right? So just something to consider. But how old is Egypt really? So whatever you're seeing, I felt all of these hieroglyphs and statues and all of that, you know, like all of this, a lot of it reminded me of Greece, by the way. If you go to Athens and you go to all these structures, there was this one place in Luxor that looked very similar to Greece to me. I'm like, oh, that's strange. They all kind of look the same. You know, they're kind of in the same area, of course, but they kind of all look the same. Maybe 500 years old is what I got. This is me just reading on it. Okay, so this is my insight. If you don't appreciate it, you can of course turn off the video, go elsewhere. But basically, maybe 1500s or so, maybe 1400s. There, I don't know exactly, but like it felt like 500 years to me. And also in this picture, you see this guy right here. They're like fixing the hieroglyphs. You know, I actually saw people painting color on the hieroglyphs while I was there. So they close off this random room and then they come with a little paint easel or whatever and just paint over the color. I'm like, are you joking? You're actually telling me straight from the start, this is not renovating. You're basically recreating all these hieroglyphs. So that was like a bit of a shock to see, because I was like, oh, so in addition to Egypt having the energy of con men, now actually in live, you see them doing it. And so that was one of them. The guy in the foreground is taking a picture of a Russian tourist, but of course you have to pay for it. So he always wants a tip. You know, he kind of lures you into this room. Then he's like, oh, let me take a picture with your phone. Oh yeah, I'll take like 10 pictures. Oh yeah, can you give me a tip? Can you give me a tip? So you have to give him like $1, like $1 or $5, depending on how generous you are. It just gets so old. The entire like after a few days, I was over it. I was like, you know, I really just want to walk around here, not give you a tip for once, and just enjoy my time here. And it's difficult. It's really hard. So energetically, Egypt just kind of feels like that to me. So it kind of, you know, Egypt can be a stressful place to be in, like especially Cairo. Hair loss due to the adrenaline was what happened to me specifically. It might be different for you. You might enjoy your time there, obviously. If you're going on a completely planned tour with 10, 20 people, if you go on one of those illegal energy tours where they basically do all of these weird activations in the Egyptian pyramids, which are only 500 years old, by the way, and they kind of show you, oh yes, and yes, now we're going to open up the Isis portal and everything. If you go on those tours and you're constantly surrounded by the same people of the tour and you never walk around alone, you should be okay. But if you're a bit adventurous and you actually don't believe in that, and you just kind of want to walk around, you don't believe in the ISIS activations and everything, you just want to walk around, you will be harassed and they will try to scam you at every street corner. And I'm not saying that to be derogative, I'm just saying it because that was my experience. So 500 years max, maybe in the 1500s, there was a form of a reset. All of these hieroglyphs look very artificial, too colorful. Basically, we're being lied to. You know, everything's a lie. Egypt's a lie. I personally felt the most spiritual energy in Jerusalem. So I know Jerusalem is not a lie. And I had a person comment on one of my Jerusalem videos being like, oh, it felt like Disneyland to me, so fake. And I'm like, are you even for real right now? Did you not see the military at every street corner in Jerusalem trying to arrest the Arabs? Did you not see this? Did you not see it? Like, how does that feel like Disney World to you? I don't understand that at all. It's true, the entire crucifixion story over there, yeah, it's overdone. I agree. But I felt more when I was walking along the Arabic part in Jerusalem than when I was walking around Egypt and Cairo, which is an Arabic country, just to give an idea of my personal insight. So it's almost like there's different keys in different places, and a lot of it is locked away. Where is the real Egypt? Closer to Nubia. For people who don't know, Nubia is close to Sudan. It's even part of it extends into Sudan. So you're basically talking about South Egypt up into North Sudan. But basically it's on a different timeline. Okay. So it's kind of like if I were to go to Sudan, I'm not sure it would be safe right now, similar to Afghanistan and Iran. Other countries might be safer though. But Sudan, Nubia's kind of in that stretch, and then somehow all the tombs were supposed to be up in Luxor. Like that doesn't really make sense to me either, because Nubia itself is a good 4 to 5 hours by car from that area, from Luxor. So it's mainly confusion and lies and fake. That's what I felt when I was in that part in Egypt. Jordan to me had more history. Also, some giant statues in Luxor looked like entities. So I might have to share them when I do the video properly on how the energy felt in each place. But basically, they had these giant statues. So it's not this picture, but it was a different picture. They had these giant statues in Luxor, and that's like the first stop on a tour. And every tour you do, where you can just take your pictures and everything, but they looked like huge entities to me. You know, they were supposed to be deities or whatever, and I'm like, this is what people worship? That's crazy. That's like the biggest psychic attack you can call upon you, basically. So there was something else here too. Right. Okay. So with Nubia and Sudan and all of that. So basically, I do feel there could be parts of some real tombs over there, but Egypt overall felt like it was on a completely different timeline, meaning we're just kind of looking at the overlay of Egypt. So all those pyramids in Giza, the same thing, by the way. When I was walking along the pyramids of Giza and the Sphinx, I was looking at the Sphinx and I was like, this is it. This is legit it. Are you kidding? I'm not getting anything from this statue. It looks good, don't get me wrong. The pyramids looked okay too. That was like, there's nothing. No, this is fake. I always felt this was not the real deal somehow. And so to me, what I got was maybe they were kind of before we went underground, or wherever we are right now in this, call it a cave, call it whatever, we're somewhere else than we were 3,000 to 4,000 years ago even. So before that, maybe the real pyramids are right over that somehow. So it's kind of like an overlay we're looking at, or kind of an underlay we're looking at. So yeah, they could have looked that way. They could have been of the same height, the same statue, all of that. But we're just looking at a projection, or we're just looking at a fake thing. That's the best way I can explain it. Similar to the Ankh, being like a tool to psychically remote view, like a portal to the underworld in that sense. But I do think a lot of these things, like the entire Egyptian history, did exist in a form or another. Obviously, it's been misinterpreted, and it's up to us to reinterpret that. Like whatever you hear on these tours, a lot of it is just incorrect. Similar with the Ankh once again, or even the scarab. I think there's more to the scarab story too. But in short, yeah, I feel it just energetically felt like there was something missing. And the reason for that is because we're kind of just looking at remade things, like things that maybe it's similar with Stonehenge. I haven't been to Stonehenge yet, but maybe like there was a real Stonehenge and then they kind of just remade it in the 1920s, as some pictures show too. So maybe it's the same way that it is with those structures, and perhaps also all these other structures all over the world. Even though some Mayan runes felt really sincere, like the ones in Guatemala, in Coba too, in a form or another, but Chichen Itza, to me, Chichen Itza also felt like it wasn't real. But there was this one in, was it Tikal in Guatemala? I was there in 2018, that also felt more real than anything you really see in Mexico. So why did Tutankhamun die? Because of a broken heart. So he had 2 children that died when they were really young. His wife was like 19, he was 19 or 18 even. And she gave birth to these 2 kids, but they died in childbirth. And people say it was most likely because of malnutrition and all these other things, because they were too young, or also incest and whatnot. But he died more because of a broken heart, because of his children dying, than anything else. Some say he had like this one thing in his, he had like this one injury in his left or right leg. I forgot which one exactly. I got to look that one up. And that's why, from complications of those, maybe he passed away from that, or also many other things. A lot of pharaohs did pass away at a young age, which kind of makes you wonder what was going on there. And this is the kicker. They say all these tombs have been preserved so magnificently is simply because there are no, what did they say? There's no bacteria in the air because Luxor is a desert area, so there's no bacteria in the air. And so that's why when all these tombs were kind of raided or opened up 100 years ago or 150 years ago, they were preserved, like all the colors preserved because of that. Yeah, there's maybe a little bit is true with that, but I don't think these are older than 500 years, if even. And just like the different color variations that you find all over makes you think about a lot. It just makes you wonder. So that's kind of the insight I got on that. I think there were a few more things, but yeah, I wanted to talk about Jerusalem a bit more too. I think I'm going to have to make a separate video on how each area felt energetically, in addition to kind of airing the videos of when I was actually there. But in short, Middle East is not an easy trip necessarily. If you're a single woman traveling, some people think it's okay. For me personally, it felt safer than South America for sure. You know, for me, traveling solo through South America at this point, I don't enjoy it. So I know I'm probably not going to do it. But traveling through the Middle East, yes, it's true. It's pretty safe. It's just, it can be stressful in certain areas because you're just basically, they basically just want to sell you everything they own, you know, in order to get the US dollar in a form or another. And it does kind of get old. I do have to say that. Okay, what is the Holy Grail exactly? The Holy Grail is a bloodline. So that's the Jesus, Jeshua bloodline, Jeshua and Mary Magdalene bloodline. But we can talk about that in a different video too. There was one more thing, something with Tutankhamun's blood. So all of these pharaoh bloodlines. Yeah, Tutankhamun, he was married to his half sister, is what they say, right? So basically, all these bloodlines from these pharaonian bloodlines, I think they transferred over to different countries. So you know, reincarnation experienced. I think a lot of these Egyptian pharaohs were reincarnated in the French, just like the entire European royal, so French and English specifically, maybe also the German royal line and bloodlines and everything, but they're all related to each other. You know, it all starts with like Great Britain and everything. Israel, what does Israel mean? Israel's like the Eye of Israel, right? Isn't that what it translates to? So the entire Eye of Ra that they give you, you know, another new age thing. And the Ankh, I feel the Eye of Ra, like when you look through an Ankh, you can basically have an Eye of Ra. The Ra, which is Ra, the god that they supposedly worshipped, and the Ankh, all of that used to be these like highly spiritual concepts that were just really hijacked, and they were hijacked by everything, by Egyptian history, by the New Age, by religion, everything. They say this here is basically the cross, so the cross kind of formed out of it. I don't necessarily see it that way. So you had the Coptics in Cairo too, but the Coptics came way after Jeshua and Christianity was formed. So I'm not saying this from a religious standpoint, by the way. It's just more of the insight that I got. And the Coptics were Arabs, by the way. The Coptics were not necessarily the Christians that you have nowadays. So it's all just kind of mixed and muddled up in that entire area. You did have this one church called the Hanging Church in Cairo, which I went to. Once again, it just felt completely not, I don't want to say fake because I know it's been there for a few hundred years, but it didn't feel like the real deal to me. So there's definitely something with the history being muddled up. The Hanging Church in Cairo was supposedly the church Jesus went to first as a kid when his parents had to flee because they were being persecuted as well. And then later on, when he actually survived his crucifixion, which I discussed in a different video, so he was able to survive it as a shadow of himself, but still. And then him, Mary Magdalene, and a few of his family members went to Egypt and kind of escaped from Egypt over into Europe and a few other places. And that's all related to Avalon, or whatever you want to call Avalon. So there's a lot that goes into it. We're going to leave it at that. I hope this helps. Let me know what else you want to hear about. I'm still processing a lot of impressions. It's taking a while because there's also other things going on in my life. And so whenever I have a moment, I'm just like, wow, this was like a really intense trip in a form or another. But I also feel it was that way because we were locked down for quite a while. And maybe it would have felt differently like in 2019. I'm not sure. But I do think you're being drawn to certain places whenever you're supposed to go there, from my experience at least. And so I'm happy I was able to see it when I was able to see it. Definitely happy to see it before Passover and Ramadan and all of that, because Ramadan's currently going on over there and everything's just really closed down, or it's just not as open as it was when I was there. All right, guys, have a wonderful one. Talk to you very soon. Bye.